1961, one afternoon in Lovatse, following another meeting that was really, a colonial meeting, where those that were in attendance of that meeting decided there was time for them to meet to look at the future of Botswana as they were beginning to prepare for the country to be independent. Well, following the 1961 meeting in Lovatse, a meeting was called initially in Muchudi, but the Muchudi meeting aborted. And the reasons for its abortion being that the authorities, the traditional authorities at the time, were not encouraged to want to have the BDP founded within the Gauteng area. And what then happened was that the meeting was then scheduled on the 28th of February, 1962, in Gaborone, where perhaps you may have either known, heard, or seen. There is a tree there next to Orapa House. That is the place where the first meeting was held. And thereafter, the party was founded. Amongst its initial members were Sestra Khama, who eventually became the president of the Bechuanaland Protectorate Democratic Party, and then Ramasire, both of whom eventually became the presidents of the country. The continent of Africa was experiencing what was then called the winds of change, which basically meant that a lot of the colonized territories or countries or continents were beginning to want to be free. They wanted to end colonization in order that they can decide their own affairs in the manner in which they would have felt is in the best interest of the peoples of those countries. So Botswana was not spared from the winds of change. And therefore, the burning desire to, in the first instance, build a nation state called Botswana, free of dependence and the government of the colonizing United Kingdom, or Britain, if you will, was that which was the burning platform for the formation of the Botswana Democratic Party, offering an opportunity for Botswana to have a nation state called Botswana, and in a manner that will be self-governing and determining the future of the country. That was really the issue at the time. At the beginning of the party, as can be discerned from the first manifesto, the values of the Bechuanaland Protectorate, Bechuanaland Democratic Party, as it was called then, was a party that stood for unity, a party that stood for republicanism. In other words, a republic. And therefore, you need to understand this from the context of the fact that at that particular time, the so-called 8 Meraf were actually nation states. They were independent. They were, if you will, countries in their own right. And therefore, when we talk about national unity, the unity was that we needed these 8 nation states to come together to form one entity called the Republic of Botswana. And that idea of unifying the 8 nations to form one country was one of the issues that played the most important thing in defining then and in the present the constitution of the Republic of Botswana, and indeed that of the party.
Well, the values and principles of this country come right out of the culture of Ronarele Botswana. We've got Botho. It is something that cuts across all tribal areas. Every Botswana in the country understands what Botho is. Development. Development even before independence. That was something that was actually more on the shoulders and resting on the shoulders of Dikhosi tsa rona, whether it be for the development of schools, whether it be for public works, of these small drift bridges, of small dams to be created, hospitals, working with the churches. A lot of that was happening prior to independence. And that is why the whole culture, ya Ronarele Botswana, some of those key tenets were then incorporated into the value system and within the constitution of the then new ruling party of Botho, development, self-reliance. That is why within the vision of the BDP, it talks about wanting to be a political force as early as 1962 that becomes the leading political party within the country, and to encourage the culture of self-reliance and volunteerism as well as patriotism. And that is why ultimately when we talk about the spirit of volunteerism, you can hear of these legendary stories of the founding members such as Sekitumile, and obviously the then president, late president, they're both late, Cecil Sekama, of how with a single truck he will be traipsing around the entire country selling BDP at rallies, a new party that was competing against parties that had already existed, such as the firebrand ones, Sabo BPP. And that whole voluntary system was to go to every part of Botswana to find out who are the influencers there, who are the people who are willing to believe in a party that is saying, we want to develop Botswana. It is one of the poorest countries in the world. And together, like we have been doing it before independence, we are indeed going to do the physical development, the social, economic development of individuals. And that is obviously an ongoing challenge, because as we face the challenges of today with COVID, it is still principles that are within the constitution of the ruling party that self-reliance and development still needs to happen, because ultimately it's an ongoing journey. Well, the party colors, some of them are quite obvious, but maybe it's good to give a bit of a context. The black is to symbolize the darkness that, as a country, of the underdevelopment that we had at that particular time. That Botswana as a country, whether you talk about physical infrastructure, whether you talk about human development, I mean, one of the things that positioned Cecil Sekama to be the leader is that in those days, there were very few Botswana who were not only educated, but educated to a degree level. And there were various other players who had gone to Tiger Kloof, who like Sekitumela Masire. These were men and women who had that common touch of understanding what people wanted in terms of the farming that used to be done in those days. So that darkness of the black was to be reminding us that indeed this is a party that says it wants to take this country out of the darkness it is in, the lack of development, to get it to a more developed country. And whilst we are on that, then the issue then became the red color. The red color, for some people might think that it's to do with the blood and to do with a struggle, it was an armed struggle, but it is actually the red of basically going through fire. It's that whole heat that we've had to go through, that everyone had to do their part during those era. I mean, that era was a time where the civil service was predominantly all expatriate, with very few Botswana in those positions. So it was going through all those challenges of communication in terms of development around the country. So the fire is actually the battles that even the Ministry of Finance at the time, which used to have more of its budget coming in from development aid from the United Kingdom, then it came from the mineral resources that we later then were able to maximize benefit from. And of course, the white is the light. It's always the light of saying, in all the darkness that we've come out of, and we will still go through periods of darkness, just like in normal life. We're going through perhaps one of the darkest moments of our economy right now, which is through this COVID pandemic, is that we're going to have to toil, we're going to have to work harder, we're going to have to think smarter and be more competitive, so that at the end of the day, we still see what the light is. There's always lighter than the tunnel. It sounds like a pun, but ultimately speaking, that is what the symbolism of the black, white, and red, or the black, red, and white, I sometimes get it confused depending on how you lay it out. But that is what those colors were, and it's ultimately a brand that has stuck as to the test of time, you know, and BDP is still the party that is in power, and still the party that indeed Botswana have so far given faith, and with a lot of work to do, obviously, as we obviously know, over the next few years. Well, the structure of the BDP, it is a very complex but very simple structure. It is done to ensure that from the lowest level, there is participation. You start off at the cell level, which has 6 committee members. Just a chairman, a secretary, and a treasurer, and just 3 ordinary members. And a cell is exactly like in your body. It's very important for the greater functioning of the greater body. So within a cell can then select delegates and ultimately go to a congress of a ward. A ward is normally politically headed by a councillor. But from a political point of view in the party, actually, you'll have constituencies, you will have wards that don't have a party councillor represented because maybe the opposition is there. So the actual ward is under the auspices and control of the ward committee, which has got a chairman under a committee of 18 people, which has an executive, and then it has ordinary members. From there, you then have a branch. So within a branch structure, it's the same structure as the ward. It's got 18 people chaired by the chair, 18 people. Delegates from a ward are selected, elected at a ward congress that go to a branch congress. From the branch congress, you elect a branch, and then from a branch, you then have what we call regional conferences. The regional committee has got just 6 people, and these are people that are representing the region, and I think there's 14 regions that BDP has carved up around the country. And then from the regions, you then have the central committee. Central committee is the highest organ of the party. It is the party organ that effectively administers the party. But the most important gathering within the structure of the party is, of course, the council, is the congress. And that's the one that can change party policy, to make resolutions to what ministers, or should I say members of parliament, should be doing as per the wishes of the Democrats. But in order for that to happen, you've got a national council that is able to debate policy, amend policy, and send recommendations for final approval at a national congress, and that's the one that actually elects the central committee, and the central committee is the one that effectively runs the party with the headquarters of Tsoletsa, as we call it, that effectively is the administrative center of the party. So that is the structure, and the way it's designed is that when you've got constituencies that are far apart in terms of distance, is that you can have a ward in Tsabong and have another ward in Boxpits, and the distance is huge, but that wards are able to operate in isolation of other wards with the branch overseeing it, and that is how the participation in democracy then happens, is because at every level you can participate to the level that you feel you've got time for, you've got passion for. Some people in the ruling party or in any political organization just want to participate by being a member, to vote when there is a national election, to participate by attending fundraising events. It's everything that's different. Others want to be in the front line, others just want to be advisors. So there's room for just about everybody if you want to find your space within that organization. So that's the structure. Well, it should be the easiest thing. You know, the vision of the party is to be a political force, and therefore it means that you could join the party whichever part of Botswana you're at. The way it actually is meant to operate is that you're in a cell. you are interested in being a member of the party, you speak to a member of the cell to say, look, about the join a party. Now that cell person can link you to the secretary of that particular ward, who could link you to the secretary of the branch, who must have the overall authority in the constituency to say, the formats are joining are with me. You fill in your MAN number, so long as I think you're over 16, you can then fill in all your details. There's a carbon copy that you get, you pay, I think it's 5 pula for 5 years, or it's 1 pula a year. There's life membership, which I think is 100 pula. I can't remember because it's like a joiner back in the day. So effectively, that's what will happen. So for you, even sitting here in Gaborone, you could walk to Tsoletsa in theory and say you want to join the BDP, you believe in their vision, you believe in what they're trying to do, but actually then say, for a minute, wherever the case is. So what effectively is going to happen is that you would fill in and give the detail of your choice ward, because you have to come from a ward, which comes from a constituency, and then it is for the head office, or Tsulet, or the executive of the party, to then effectively inform the secretary of that branch, or even prior to that, to say, we have somebody here who wants to join from your area, because there's meant to be this coordination so that a branch doesn't all of a sudden see somebody who says they're a member, but they don't know that that member has joined. So that is really how simple it's meant to be. Well, historical milestone, I have to talk really more about my experience, which has changed the way the BDP was. Because as you can imagine, like I said, around 1978-79, the youth wing was formed. And as you know, from a population point of view, the majority of our population is under the age, I think, of 30 or 25, whatever the number is. So a major milestone was a ruling party that is seen as ultra-conservative, and being able to accept that we must not only have an age limit within the youth wing, which has happened in 1997, but that would then usher in an era where more young people are able to participate at a youth level in the constituencies that they're in, be part of the structure, get groomed. I mean, you only have to go to the tertiary institutions now, an example being the University of Botswana, where way back in the mid-90s, a cell was set up called GS26 today, and that cell became a breeding ground for future politicians of the ruling party, because ultimately all the political parties have got their youth cells at University of Botswana, and now obviously at the other tertiary institutions. So I'd say that was a major milestone in changing the dynamic, because you only have to compare us to some of our neighboring political parties where they have a youth league, which has got a different powers and strengths as compared to a wing, where ultimately approvals of changes of any kind that are major, the BDP Youth Wing still has to get the ultimate sanction of the main constitution of the ruling party and the main Congress, because ultimately the Youth Wing has regulations as opposed to the main party that effectively is the overarching authority. So I would say that I would narrow it down to that in terms of what the major achievements, and all the other ones, they've been major ones over time. You can imagine for one reason or another, when we changed the constitution for automatic succession of a president in '98, these were major changes constitutionally within the country, and that is where, from a political point of view, it meant that the constitution also of the party had to align itself with that. And these are some of the major things that have happened. And now, of course, we are talking about the wholesale of the entire constitution of the country, in terms of having it more participatory and fair and equal to all people in Botswana. And these are some of the pledges that our manifesto has come up with, and indeed some of the things that definitely have to start happening, subject to what's going on with the COVID, but ultimately I think the ball has started rolling in terms of an overall viewing of that constitution. And these are some of the things that students at tertiary institutions should actually be saying, well, where in the constitution can we focus? I'm a politics student, I'm an economics student, I'm a social development student. Where are the areas where our constitution needs to bring itself in line with one of the most modern constitutions in the world, which is the one in South Africa, which gives more powers to the people than to the executive or to the institutions. So these are some of the things that we're not saying it's going to be a cut and paste, but everything can be done to suit our culture, but definitely the new generation wants a more liberal constitution, and these are some of the things that have been espoused within the manifesto of the ruling party, and definitely something that people are watching to see that indeed it happens. Well, look, I mean, if you think about it, yes, there's challenges, and there have been challenges throughout the decades. We took independence in 1966. We know that prior to that, diamonds had already been discovered in Orapa. We've seen what happens with other countries in Africa where minerals are discovered, and the battle that happens of trying to gain independence, where it becomes an armed struggle. So you can imagine one of the greatest achievements, and that's not to say that we should be resting on those laurels, because today's generation is only interested in what the challenges are today and what are you doing about them today, not history. History is just a guide. So you can imagine taking this country, starting a mine, mining it. Through the 70s, the mine's product, which is the diamond, is not yet being sold. So you're still having development budget issues, a small limited budget. Now people expecting the things that countries that are independent would do, which is having a development budget for all the various ministries. So I would say one of those first achievements was to stably be able to mine the resources and an environment and a partnership that showed that by the 1980s we were able to then reap the benefits and start the economic development in earnest. So I think some of those big challenges politically, and it's also being able to, as a ruling party, be able to navigate throughout the past 50 years, especially in the past 20 years, I would say, if not 30 years, where politics is always about a rivalry of ideas, or sometimes rivalry on being the most popular. And like any organization, there are factions, and maybe perhaps what the ruling party has been able to do very successfully is to be able to manage those democratic expectations of choice and freedom of choice, and be able to still manage it and still be able to win elections and have the country still go through the development challenges and the expectations that the new generation has. So I think some of those big challenges that faced over the decades, the ruling party, when it's all said and done, and yes, we are facing major challenges right now, but ultimately speaking, it's going to be about what ideas and how those ideas are sold in order to be able to say, of the political parties in Botswana, which are the parties that ultimately people see a future in the next 5 to 10 years. And really that's what the founding document of the BDP has set its main objective. And its main objective has been, yes, to win the elections, but it's definitely been to develop the country and its people.
It's a very long story, but the one that I would want to start with is that if you looked at the history, you would know that of the political parties that were contesting the first elections, the BDP was last, the one that was formed last. And the BDP was the only party that was not drunk with the idea of socialist revolution. They had always been focused on modesty. And I would want to think that in selling the first manifesto, which was based on national unity and self-reliance, and as you may know, unlike perhaps in other places, our national resources are indeed national, such as if you have diamonds in Orapa or in Jwaneng, they are not regional resources. They are resources that we sell for everybody else. The same with tourist resources or other natural resources such as tourism and wildlife. That, in fact, I think is the first primary success that I'll say in moving towards building and cementing the ideals of national unity. The BDP has been very successful in making sure that our resources, independent of where in what has become the Republic of Botswana, they are exploited for the benefit of all. So that to me is one of the most important successes that one can speak of. And from that particular one springs other successes such as your very presence here as students, myself and those that have come even before me, that we were sent to school on the basis of the national resources that came from different regions of the country, and we have developed the country in various ways. I mean, it's not really a cliche to say that the infrastructure that we now have, we have not inherited. At the beginning of the journey of Botswana, there was really no infrastructure to talk about. Now, I think on the African continent, we are one of those that have infrastructure, whether it is a roads network, whether it is now IT, whether it is now the built environment. We are ranking amongst those that are performing, satisfactorily. A lot can still be done in those areas, but I think that the successes of the Botswana Democratic Party as a ruling party are anchored largely on their view of development and national unity. Thank you.